Nobody talks about this, but A&W did not collapse because of money. The mug stopped being cold. That is where it ended. The glass used to come out of the freezer with ice crystals on the outside, and the root beer hit it. And something happened that cannot happen in a paper cup. The day they handed you a warm glass, A&W was already gone. The sign stayed up, but the thing that made it A&W walked out the door. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. There were 2,400 of them, more than McDonald's had, and every single one of them had the mug. A heavy glass mug that had been sitting in a freezer at 0 degrees until the second they pulled it out and filled it with root beer. The glass was so cold that ice crystals formed on the outside the moment it hit the warm air. You could see your breath reflected in it if the night was cool enough. When they poured the root beer in, it hit the frozen glass, and something happened that does not happen in a can or a bottle or a paper cup or anywhere else on earth. The root beer foamed up thick and slow and dark, and the foam rose over the rim like it was trying to escape, and the smell hit you before the glass even reached your hand. Sweet and sharp and cold in a way that you could smell coldness itself. And you wrapped your hand around that mug and your fingers went numb in 3 seconds, and you brought it to your lips, and the first sip was so cold it made your teeth ache, and you did not care because nothing in your life had ever tasted like that, and nothing since has come close. That mug was not a container. That mug was the entire point. You have to understand what a drive-in was before you can understand what losing one felt like. It was not a restaurant. You did not walk inside. You did not stand in line. You did not sit at a table under fluorescent lights staring at a plastic tray. You pulled your car into a parking lot and you stayed in your car and the restaurant came to you. There was a metal canopy over the parking spaces and a speaker box on a pole next to your window. And you rolled your window down and pushed the button, and a voice crackled through the speaker and said, "Welcome to A&W, may I take your order?" And you said 2 Papa Burgers, 2 root beers, a baby burger, and a baby root beer for the little one, and the voice said, "That will be right out." And then you waited, and the waiting was everything. Because while you waited, you looked around that parking lot, and it was a Friday night in July, and there were 40 cars under that canopy, and every window was rolled down, and every radio was playing, and the smell of grilled onions and root beer was mixing with the smell of warm asphalt and cut grass from the field behind the lot. And your kids were in the back seat fighting over whose turn it was to sit by the window. And your wife was fixing her lipstick in the visor mirror, and you were 29 years old. And there was nowhere else in the world you would rather be than right here in this parking lot in this town on this Friday night, waiting for a teenage girl on roller skates to bring you a burger and a root beer in a frozen mug. The Carhop, that sound. You heard her before you saw her, the wheels on the pavement. That specific rumble of rubber skate wheels on asphalt that was different from any other sound in the world. She came around the corner of the building carrying an aluminum tray stacked with food, and she was 16 or 17, and she was wearing a short skirt and a little cap, and she was skating between parked cars without spilling a drop, and she arrived at your window and she hooked that tray right onto the edge of your door like it was the most natural thing in the world. The tray just hung there, suspended in the air outside your car window. Burgers wrapped in foil, fries in a paper boat still glistening, onion rings still too hot to eat, and the mugs. The mugs sitting on that tray, sweating in the summer air with the frost already melting, and the root beer dark and perfect and waiting. And she smiled and said, "Enjoy." And she skated away, and you heard those wheels fade across the lot toward the next car, and you unwrapped your burger and you bit into it, and the juice ran down your wrist, and your wife handed you a napkin, and your kid in the back seat said, "Can I have my root beer now?" And you passed the baby mug back to him, and he grabbed it with both hands, and his eyes went wide because it was so cold, and he drank it without breathing, and when he put it down, there was a foam mustache on his upper lip, and he grinned, and that grin is still in your head right now. And the kid who made that grin is 47 years old and lives in another state and has kids of his own who have never eaten a meal in a car from a tray hooked to a window. And the mugs you stole, Every family in America stole at least one. Your father had a complete set in the kitchen cabinet: baby mug, regular mug, mama mug, papa mug. All of them lifted from A and W over the course of a decade. The technique was always the same. You finished your root beer. You looked around to make sure the Carhop was not watching. You slid the mug under the seat, and you drove away. There are men in their 70s right now who still have a stolen A&W mug in their kitchen that they took in 1963, and they will not throw it away, and they will not explain why. And if you ask them about it, they will smile and look away. And that mug is worth more to them than anything else in that kitchen, because that mug is not a mug. That mug is a Friday night in 1963 when they were 19 and the windows were down and the radio was on and there was a girl in the passenger seat, and the root beer was so cold it made their teeth ache, and the whole world was a parking lot under a tin canopy, and nothing had gone wrong yet. The parking lot was not just where you ate, it was where you went. There is a difference. You did not go to A&W because you were hungry. You went because it was Friday, and Friday meant A&W the same way Sunday meant church. You knew who would be there. You knew which car belonged to which family. You pulled in and you looked around and you saw Billy's Impala 3 spaces down, and that meant Billy was back from college, and you would honk and he would walk over and lean on your door and talk for 20 minutes while the ice melted in your mug. And you saw Mr. Henderson's truck at the far end, and that meant the Henderson kids were in the back seat with root beer floats just like your kids. The parking lot was a neighborhood without houses, a living room without a roof, and on a summer Friday night, it was the center of your whole town, and everybody knew it and everybody came, and if you were not there, you were nowhere. If you were a parent in 1965, it was the easiest night of your week. No cooking, no dishes, no tablecloth, no arguments about vegetables. Load the kids in the car, drive to the A&W, order through the speaker, eat in the car with the windows down and the radio on. The little ones got a baby mug and a baby burger, and they thought they were royalty. Nobody cried, nobody fought. Nobody spilled anything that mattered because you were in the car and the car could be wiped down. Your wife was next to you, and she was relaxed for the first time all week because she did not have to cook and she did not have to clean up, and she was eating onion rings with her fingers and laughing at something on the radio. And the kids were quiet in the back because the root beer was cold and the fries were hot, and the world was small and safe and exactly the right temperature. At the end of the night, the Carhop came back and collected the trays and the mugs you did not steal, and you started your engine and you pulled out slowly. Everybody pulled out slowly at the A&W. You wanted to see who was watching. You wanted them to see your car. Headlights swept across the canopy one at a time as the lot emptied, and the neon sign kept glowing orange and brown over the parking spaces long after the last car was gone, and the Carhop took off her skates, and the fryers were turned off, and the mugs went back in the freezer for tomorrow. Then they took it away, not all at once, piece by piece, the way things die when nobody is paying attention. A company called Yum Brands bought A&W, and they looked at the numbers, and the numbers said co-brand. So they took the A&W sign and they bolted it next to a KFC sign on the same building on a strip next to a gas station. They took the root beer that used to be made fresh from concentrate, and they replaced it with a bag in a box plugged into a machine. Same machine as every gas station in America. They took the Frosty mug and they replaced it with a paper cup with a plastic lid. Same cup as every drive-thru in America. They took the canopy and the speaker boxes and the parking spots and the trays that hooked onto your window, and they threw all of it away because the numbers said indoor seating was more efficient. You walked inside and you stood in line and you ordered at a counter, and they handed you your food on a plastic tray, and you sat at a table next to a KFC bucket and drank root beer from a paper cup that was the same temperature as everything else in the room. The coldness was gone. The frost was gone. The mugs were gone. The Carhop was gone. The parking lot where you saw everybody you knew on Friday night was gone. The sound of roller skate wheels on asphalt was gone. And the root beer tasted the same as the root beer you could buy in a can at any grocery store for 79 cents. Because without the frozen mug, it was the same. The mug made it something else. The mug made it A&W. Without the mug, it was just brown soda. The franchisees watched it happen. They watched the company they had built their lives around get diluted and cheapened and shoved into a corner next to a bucket of fried chicken. In 2011, they did something nobody expected. They bought it back. A group of franchise owners pooled their money and purchased A&W from the company that had stripped it clean. They brought back the frosty mugs. They brought back fresh-made root beer from concentrate poured into frozen glass right in front of you. Some locations brought back Carhop service. Sales went up every single year. Average revenue per store climbed nearly 50% in a decade. 70 new restaurants opened, but the parking lot is smaller now. The canopy is rare. The Carhop is an event, not a standard. The Friday night crowd that filled 40 spots under a tin roof is a Tuesday afternoon with 6 cars and a family of 4 and a retired couple who drove 30 miles because this is the last A&W in the county and they wanted to drink root beer from a frozen mug one more time before the summer ends. They sit in their car with the windows down and the radio on and the mug sweating in their hands, and they do not talk because they do not need to. They both know what this is. This is the parking lot in 1965. This is the Carhop skating across the asphalt. This is the speaker crackling to life and asking what they would like tonight. This is the burger wrapped in foil and the fries in the paper boat and the baby mug passed to the back seat and the kid with the foam mustache who lives in another state now. This is Friday night when the whole town showed up and nobody stayed home, and the root beer was so cold it made your teeth ache, and your wife was laughing, and the world was exactly the right size. That is what A&W's collapse took. Not a restaurant, not a brand, not a quarterly earnings report, a feeling, one feeling. The feeling of sitting in your own car on a summer night with the windows down and the people you love the most within arm's reach and a frozen mug in your hand and nowhere to be and nothing to do and no reason to leave. That is what they stopped freezing when they stopped freezing the mug, not the glass, the feeling inside it. If you remember A&W, tell me which one was yours. If you remember the mug and the frost and the first sip that made your teeth ache, tell me about that. If your father had a stolen mug in the kitchen cabinet that he never threw away, tell me about it. And if you drove 30 miles last summer just to drink root beer from a frozen glass one more time, tell me how it felt. I read every single comment.